Good morning, everybody. Oh, that's excellent. Crowd response, I like that. I'm going to start with a little story. It was funny, I built this slide, and Kingmakers, it looks nice. Reminded me of a movie, Kingsman. I don't know if you've seen that. I'm in LA, I was thinking that sort of a, interesting connection. I came up with a great screenplay. So I've been watching Silicon Valley as well, so I got a screenplay. And so I'm going to twist this around. Everyone in LA, they want to be an actor. You can't make money being an actor, so they all have these side gigs. I'm sure some of them are developers as a side gig, right? Trying to make money. I thought, wouldn't it be fun to flip that around? What if there's a struggling developer, and their side gig is they're a successful actor, and they use that to fund their new startup, right? Which I thought was going to be a great play, and then over cocktails last night, I met him. And there's a guy doing that, which this is what the developer community is all about. So developers, it's such a cool thing now apparently that it's better than being an actor. I'm going to talk about ecosystems a little bit. I'm going to talk about communities. I'm going to talk sort of a bunch of things. I'm going to lead up to a bit of a story about how communities, developers specifically, the developer community is facing a situation where we're having change thrust on us. I'm going to talk about it from a policy perspective because that's where I come from and that's what I do, and I think it's something that people don't think enough about, but it could have a big impact. So first off, who am I? My name is Bruce Gustafson. I run the Developers Alliance. So we are an advocacy organization. We are active in Washington, D.C. We are active in Brussels. I spend time talking to politicians, regulators, et cetera, on issues that are important to the developer community. So while everybody's writing code, while everyone is worrying about their business, we're trying to make sure that the government doesn't interfere too much, or that the rules are such that it's a little easier for you guys to get your job done. It's kind of fun. It's a wonky kind of world to live in, but I think it's important. I think we'll talk about that, and we'll help you understand why we think that's the way the world works. I had a bit of a challenge when I was thinking about, what sort of imagery, what pictures do you sort of put up for ecosystems? I decided, we're code-based, we're digital, we talk algorithms. What does an algorithm look like? Ecosystems have layers. They're sort of built community on community on community. You're going to be entertained with fractals all the way through this. So excuse me for that, but hopefully there's some eye candy to go with it. I'm going to talk about ecosystems. I'm going to talk about why they're important. How you spot ones that are going to sort of do well, why they win, why they don't win. I'm going to emphasize really that stability is not the norm and that things are going to change. So as we look forward in this industry, be prepared. Churn is coming. I'm going to talk about communities a little bit. I stole this. This is obviously a book. The developers as kingmakers. I think that's absolutely true, and that's why we're engaged in that community. And then I'm going to talk, like I said, a little about change, and it'll be change with a policy flavor. So, and we'll ask for your help as we go through. So, number one. That is an awesome picture. That is an awesome picture. Ecosystems rule. So what do we mean by that? First off, what is an ecosystem in our world? What is it comprised of? What am I defining? Number of elements. It starts with some sort of a platform, hardware, software. It may be a little more than that, maybe a little less than that. Maybe there's operating systems involved. Content, that may be media, it may be transactions, it may be, user supplied. So there's a lot of definitions of what that would be. Users themselves or partners. So successful ecosystems tend not to be simple. They tend to be multi-sided. They have a bunch of people engaged who all have a different value proposition that, comes together in one place. And then ultimately, the best ecosystems are the ones that are able to scale. And it's not just sort of linear, but it's systems that are able to take advantage of something that just clicks and drive it hard. And at the end of the day, that scale item is going to be tied to the communities that are engaged. And the definition all the way through is that platforms, ecosystems, these are all marketplaces. So it's someplace where transactions take place. We have at least a short history in the digital space of ecosystems that do well and don't do well. There's lessons to be learned here. The first example, Windows, Intel, that was an awesome combination of hardware and software. Unfortunately, what we could take from that is, competition is great, but, try not to swing your elbows, don't hurt the other guys, because if you play unfair, the government steps in and they break you up, right? They shut you down, they lock you out, they change the rules. So, what do we learn? Bad guys, government regulators can punish you. Next example, we've got the social media sites, MySpace. They're still around, which always surprises me, but, had some success, tried to do a bunch of things, tried to force it a little bit, got a bit disengaged, sort of engaged into too many areas at once. Some fast followers came in that were a little simpler, did it right, all right, focused on just, providing the marketplace and build the communities and let the communities do what they wanted to do. Brand isn't enough, right? So people have then tried to duplicate that capability. It's not always so easy. So message there is perhaps, a fast follower is good, stick to the knitting, try not to just leverage your brand and build something that people don't want or communities don't need. Because we're at a telecom show, the handset wars. So, Nokia and others sort of started with smartphones, right? They brought them in, they had hardware, they had software, they had a bunch of things. Once again, fast followers came in, recognized operating system was important, an applications ecosystem, partners, community around that was important, and they were successful because they recognized sort of that different model. Going forward, I put Walmart and Amazon. I mean, Walmart is entering the digital space, right? There's no reason that they can't do everything that Amazon did. I'm not sure if they're going to be a fast follower and they're going to win that fight. But, two huge ecosystems, supply chains. The question is, where is the market and how does that take place? So all that leads up to, okay, we have all these different examples. Digital ecosystems, some successful, some not so successful. I'm going to throw out the government and politics and policy as another ecosystem, and one that we all participate in and that our businesses participate in and rely on. The exchange in that case is, the social norms, the legal norms that we choose to live by. We are connected this way. There's multiple people participating. The dialogue takes place, and that ecosystem is going through a churn, is going through a shift, and I'll talk about that and how that's going to impact the developer community. So, in a nutshell, then, there's plenty of ways to win, but there's plenty of ways to fail. And a lesson for this group and what we're doing here is, how do we find that path that is successful? How do we identify the ecosystems that we want to join or that we want to win with, and how do we avoid the ones that maybe aren't going to do so well? I talked a little bit, and this is a little bit of a sidebar because we're at a conference that's talking about both telecom and sort of the automotive thing, and what can we learn? What history do we have? That Nokia smartphone is actually a current model that's back on the market. It's kind of a old history come back, so you can buy that thing again. That was a long time ago. My background is telecom. I've been doing that for a long time. I was doing telecom as smartphones were coming in, so I lived through 3G in the smartphone days. The mistake arguably that Nokia made was, they misidentified, first of all, they goofed on scale, but they misidentified where is that pivot point where the ecosystem, the value and the importance of the ecosystem rests. And they were thinking it was hardware and networks, right? If you had those things put together, if you owned those pieces, you'd be successful. Turns out it was operating systems and apps. If you had that worked out, then you were successful. They were thinking, hundreds of apps. The answer was millions, billions. How do you get to those numbers? You need millions of developers. You need billions of users. And so they goofed up on the scale. They goofed up on where the things would center. The connected cars, smart cars, automotive automation, IoT in an automotive concept. I'm not sure, where the balance point is going to be. I'm not sure where who has leverage and where is that marketplace going to center going forward. But I will suggest that is going to be a critical thing to find. And so watching as it develops to try to identify, where is the market form, where does the platform sit, will be critical to success. So last slide on ecosystems. My message to participants who are in this game, nothing lasts, change is coming. The more that you try to make things happen a certain way, the less successful you tend to be. So there's a certain organic nature to it. If you can build platforms and ecosystems that have multiple sides to them, multiple communities coming together, it's not just, an app to a user or content to a user. If you can bring multiple participants in, that's going to be more successful. Google's done that well. Facebook has done that well. The fast follower syndrome, so if you don't get it right, recognize there's people around you that are learning from what you do, and they're going to move fast too. And motives matter, and that's kind of homage back to the regulators and the government. If people sense that you're doing this for the wrong reasons, doing things for the wrong reasons, if it's all about the money, et cetera, they have the opportunity to punish you. And this will lead me into sort of my next little background piece, which is communities. And this is sort of the fulcrum that all of these things rest on. Communities are what ultimately make platforms and ecosystems work, and identifying and understanding them is important. My imagery shifts a little bit from abstract to sort of the complexity that comes in natural systems and how that's captured. But communities really are what makes ecosystems come together. I think we automatically think of users, okay, so there's, you need to have a community of users to sort of make your app successful. If you want to make money, you need to have a group of people that are willing to pay you something for it. But the successful ones, as I've said, are multi-sided. There's advertisers involved. Perhaps it's, people exchanging information. Perhaps it's, it's an inventory of empty rooms that somebody wants to be able to rent out to people who are looking for a place to stay. It's that exchange marketplace, and there's multiple user communities involved. Ecosystems have a community of platform partners. There's hardware people, there's software people. All of those things need to come together. And then there are people who actually bring the value, so the content people, the developers that are actually writing the code. If you want to be successful in our business, the trick is not just to wait for these people to come, but to create an environment where they do, right? To identify communities, to take care of them, to feed them, to look at what are their issues, to enable them and support them to do what they do. The reason we're here talking about automotive and how do we get developers to work in this place. We're trying to provide them the tools that they need to be able to build that community so the ecosystem thrives. There's a lot of lessons out there on how to do that. Evangelists is a great plan. The trick there is honesty is key. You can't be doing that for some twisted reason. People sense that. Overlooked communities. I'm going to talk a little bit about employees. I'll use Google as an example right now. Their employee base is looking at what they do and what they're doing with the government, some of the technologies they're working on, and that community is not necessarily on board with some of the activities that the corporation is driving. They're coming to the realization, I think, a little late that that's a community that they need to spend time with and that they're part of the ecosystem they operate in. Policymakers is the one that I'll spend the most on, and we'll talk about what that means and why that's important. From my point of view, and I'm a little bit biased, I think developers are probably the most dominant in the digital space because, ultimately all of this rests on a bit of code. And so, there are developers involved at every single step, and that's a big deal. Sidebar number 2. The communities tend to self-identify. They identify who it is that they connect with. They may or may not sort of align with the brand the way that you think, right? They may consider themselves that this is the community they belong to. They may think that they belong to an automotive community, right? The trick is to identify, with them, identify where they want to go, and then either build one that sort of is appropriate or follow it across. I'm not sure who's going to sort of own the interface concept into automotive. I don't know if it's sort of any of these people, but the community will decide. And if the community is already bonded to certain places, it'll be them that makes the decision rather than the folks trying to design it from the top. So now we get to kind of the bulk of it. As an industry, we tend to look internal at what we're working on. We focus on our issues. We focus on the technical stuff. Do consumers like it? That's the sort of the next thing that we think about. What we tend to ignore is the overall environment that we're operating in. What's going on in the outside world that could impact what we do? And there's a clear pattern over the last, I'll say, 2-3 years, that what happens in the digital economy, what is going on in the internet space, what we do as a community is now front and center in the discussions within the political community and within the community at large, right? We are the headlines. The breach notices, we're too powerful, political campaigns are being created, corrupted, all on the platforms that we've been working with. And I think that has a tremendous impact on what's going to happen in the future. So, we have built powerful ecosystems, be they social networks, be they commercial networks, transactional networks, to the point now where some of those clearly wield political power. And the political machinery has noticed that. And I sit in DC. I spend a lot of time in Brussels. It's clear that there's tension between elected officials who clearly should be running the country and the ecosystem we belong to, which they fear is actually starting to run the country in a way. And so, as a consequence, there's a bit of a fight for political power, right? And you have seen the political parties in the US turn on the internet. You have seen, we heard earlier, John was talking about privacy. I'll talk about that in a minute. But we've seen Europe turn on the internet companies, right? They're too big, they're too powerful. We need to do something about that. Which is kind of the second bullet, right? The social evolution that's taking place is being driven by our community, right? We have companies who stand up and say, our job is to do good, right? Our job is to make the world a better place. Our job is to connect people so that they can, bridge differences. Those are all noble goals. But that is the ecosystems that we belong to trying to drive social evolution. And it is something that, society has not necessarily invited us to do. So the risk is that some people are not on board. Thirdly, culture and norms. So, I look around this room, I walk around the halls here, I spend a little time in Silicon Valley. We are not the cross-section of America. We are not the cross-section of the world, right? By and large, everybody here is, you've got an education, for a living, we live in the digital space, we think about things a different way. And yet, more and more, we're the ones that are pushing political and social change. And obviously, that's not going to align with some people, right? So, my takeaway is, how close are we to the edge? Is there a point in time when the political machinery, the social machinery rises up and says, you guys can't be taking charge of this anymore. You're not doing it right. We need to do this ourselves. And so the question I ask, because I'm in the policy space, I sit between these two worlds, is it time we should be doing something different, and what would we do, and how do we address these issues? I'll throw some data at you. First off, I mean, I'm making some broad statements, but the public is not on your side, right? I mean, you go out to the average American. I mean, this is recent research from Pew. Half of the folks in the U.S. think that big internet, et cetera, needs to be heavily regulated, right? They need the government needs to wade in because this stuff is out of control, right? If I was to ask this room, how many of you think we need more regulation for sort of the internet stuff? I don't think I'd get half the room putting their hands up. Maybe I would. But I think that there's a big group out there that we need to listen to. So, and it used to be, I'll say 3-4 years ago, or under the Obama administration, I'm a political guy, so that's how time moves for me. We had Republicans on one side, we had Democrats on the other. Democrats thought the internet was awesome. That is not the case anymore, right? It doesn't matter what people's political or social viewpoints are. They see this the same way. We have two options. I move in DC, I move in Brussels. What I hear people doing is trying to explain to people why they're wrong, why this is wrong. That is one way to approach it. The other way to approach it is to say, these are just the facts, and what are we going to do to fix it, right? It's up to us to change ourselves, or not to change this perception, but to change reality. And it is political. Here you have the data that says that almost 2/3 of people think that the internet, the digital economy, censors some political viewpoints, right? And certainly we will all stand up and say that's not the case, but perception is reality, and a lot of it is because we have a bias in our political viewpoint. We are not representative of the population at large. We're a small sample, and our views and our norms are captured in what we do, and so we end up in this world. It's a corporate culture that we're imposing on society. It's the demographics of tech. So what I'm trying to say is, I think we have a problem. We have a problem here. What do we do? Well, the nice part is we have the ability to solve these things. We have the ability to do stuff. We are a collection of communities. That's what we do. I talked about ecosystems. I talked about communities. I talked about why they're important. The nice part is our communities overlap with a lot of those other communities. Our communities have power. Our communities have the ability to drive social and political change, or to hear social and political messages and do a better job. So, what do I do in my day job? I picked sort of 5 broad categories to say what are the sort of key policy problems that our industry has that the rest of the world is sort of looking at and dealing with. Number one, we're just too big and too powerful, and we need to be broken up. The big internet companies make too much money, and so you're seeing that all over the world. Europe's doing that. You got antitrust challenges here. The president talks about this all the time. Number two, on the flip side of that, because of the social power of networks, the ability of ecosystems to influence, you're now seeing government exert influence on our ecosystems to drive change on their behalf. So whether it is national security and employing digital networks to be able to monitor what's going on in the world, whether it is hate speech and how that is relegated, whether it is how we address social issues. A lot of the things that in the US at least the Constitution would prevent the government from doing, they can turn around and force the digital ecosystem to do. Thirdly, and I've talked about this, we are not representative. We are the educated elite. We have built these systems. We look at the world differently. And there's a whole group out there that recognizes that and have vilified that to some degree. We love change, right? Something new, something better, that's progress, that's innovation. We hold that up as if that's a wonderful thing. And that is a scary thing to a lot of people, right? There are a lot of people in the US and elsewhere that would just assume things don't change at all, right? We had an entire political campaign that was based on a slogan that said, let's go backwards, right, rather than forwards. And then finally, individual versus the collective. I think it's clear that we have inadvertently driven a level of tribalism in the digital sphere, right, that we never intended, right? So we now have, it is easy to see that you can get caught in one little bubble or another little bubble, and that conversations that we've tried to promote never wander outside their little groups, right? They're now echo chambers that reinforce what's going on. All of this is dangerous to us, right? It's dangerous to what we're trying to do, which is, to build awesome products, to provide sort of new services, new capabilities. That's what we're wired for. All this stuff runs in the opposite direction, and there's nothing in your business plan that is capable of addressing this. But I think there is. So I spend a lot of time. I talk to developers. I talk to policymakers. Why do I do that? Because I think the developer community within our ecosystem has a unique position within sort of all of those spheres. Developers are the ones who are kind of are uniquely vested, I'll say, because you live in this society, this is your day job, this is how a developer makes money, they want to create cool new stuff. If the ecosystem isn't healthy, they have no route to market. If there is no digital network to work on, there's no products to build, right? Nobody builds something just to sort of use themselves. They want to share it with the world. So there's a motivation there. Developers are, the term in the political world is grassroots, right? So that's the people who actually vote, the people who actually just have their own opinion, and it's their own opinion is the one they want to trumpet. Developers are awesome when I engage them on sort of policy issues. There's, somebody is passionate about any topic that was on that list. There's something that just lights them up. And, taking that passion and bringing that to policymakers and whatnot is a powerful tool for us to be able to change minds or at least influence what happens in the political world. And then finally, of course, developers are users and citizens. And so, what's good for developers is good for users. Developers are the ones that are sort of building jobs and driving innovation and keeping the pace of change going. They are what everyone wants their kids to grow up to be. And so, that's just a force for good. And so, people listen. People try to support them, right? Politicians try to support them. The challenge, and this is going to lead into my I shouldn't say, I have two plugs in here that are going to be a little self-serving. But the challenge is, of course, everyone has a day job, right? Nobody is focused on, we're writing code, we are building businesses, we are cutting deals, we are trying to solve technical problems. We are not focused on this stuff, right? And so how do you raise awareness and how do you get people engaged? And that's where people like me step in, right? So, what I do is I stand up in front of regulators, I stand up in front of politicians, I say, if you were to ask the developer community, here's what they would say, here's what they think about these things. Would you like to talk to somebody? And I'll make the introduction and I'll bring in someone who's passionate to talk about whatever the issue happens to be. What is fun is to watch those conversations, right? To see something sincere happening, right? To see an exchange between a 70-year-old senator and a 30-year-old coder, talking about, how do we make the world better? What is it that you're doing that impacts how I live and what I want to accomplish? So I do this. We do this all the time, right? Here's just a sample of the kind of stuff that we have developers engaged in, either in Europe or in DC. I mean, obviously, some of these are way easy. Education, I mean, absolutely easy to get a bunch of developers who are excited about mentoring, who want to put together, some sort of a program that would help sort of the kids in their community or to re-educate people that need new skills. Defending your ability to code. So we are engaged in, believe it or not, we support litigation that's taking place. There's a case that's going up to the Supreme Court now that would put a copyright on API, right? So, give me 10 cents every time you use an API in your work, right? I mean, that's a way different model than what we're used to. And so, it's easy to get people excited, and that's, we weighed in on everyone's behalf. It goes on and on. Immigration, I mean, the issue there is visas, right? Can we bring in the skills we need to be able to do what we want? There was a quote just yesterday in the news. They were talking to Fortune 500 CEOs. The number one concern or risk for their business right now is access to developers. It's ahead of access to capital. It's easier to raise money than it is to find developers these days, right? So that's, those are important issues. Defending the business model, we'll talk a little bit about some of that, but, ad related, how do you monetize, all those things that we've sort of gotten used to, and they're getting harder and harder to accomplish. And then, the one that I will spend most time on, defending your reputation, right? The privacy issue. So this is Cambridge Analytica. This is all developers do is hoover up people's data. This is why, people feel that we're evil and that we do evil stuff. And let me put a point on that. So here's Pew Research again. Big list of issues, right? Doesn't matter. And they were trying to say that young people feel a little different than older people, and that's fine as you go down the list, blah, 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 till you get to the bottom. Do major tech companies do enough to protect personal data? 31%. That's not a passing grade, right? So we don't. Well, what does that mean, right? That's a warning sign, because that says if you're not doing it, we're gonna encourage you to do it. Regulators love a problem, right? This is how we get votes. We're going to solve a problem. So, society says we aren't doing enough. What's interesting is, if you dive a little deeper, the communities that we engage with kind of say sort of the same thing, right? It's, you kind of get the same patterns happening. Are people treating the data well? Could they treat it better? And so we ended up, and John talked about this, but this is where we have ended up, right? Europe has taken note of all this and have decided, well, we have an opportunity in the world stage. We're going to export regulation, right? We are going to fix this because America can't. And so step one, GDPR, which takes a European set of privacy rights, and I'll sort of put the air quotes around those, because rights to privacy, that's a big, bold step forward. They haven't stopped there. So we are busy lobbying now in Europe on e-privacy, which is the next stage in that evolution. Puts another layer of regulation on top of GDPR. If you don't know what that is, we should probably have a conversation. Hot behind that, cyber standards. So Europe is going to define certification standards for IoT devices, right? You want to connect anything in Europe to anything in Europe, you'll need to be certified. And the European government is happy to take your money to do that, right? Meanwhile, what is the US doing? Well, we're arguing, we're busy holding hearings. There's a lot of discussion taking place. All that is great. My message to this audience is, it's one thing for the politicians to look at this and say, what's Europe doing? And we need new laws and all that sort of stuff. But the question is, what are we doing to solve this problem? And the problem isn't the regulation. The problem is we don't deal with private information very well, and we need to do better, right? We are disappointing our communities. So, here's the real pitch. It's time to step up. So now I've gone right into the community, right? So Stack Overflow says, let's go and talk to people. What do you think? How do we do in privacy? Developers say, we need to raise the bar. we're not very good at this. We should do better, right? We've done our own research with our developer community, and we get the same result. We get, the majority of folks come back and say, we need to do better, right? Okay, so we all agree. Here's my second blatant pitch. So I spend a lot of time in Washington, I spend a lot of time in Brussels, sitting around tables, talking with people about, and here's what the rules should be, and privacy, we need new regulation, don't do what California did, all that sort of stuff, right? I get tired of talking. So we decided we would do something, right? So we said, okay, so I don't know what the right rules are, I don't know what perfection is, I don't know what solves the perception that we are horrible on privacy, that we hoover up people's data, but I do know we can do better. So what the heck, let's do something. So, we took sort of 3 steps. We said, okay, we know that there's people out there that are bad actors, Cambridge Analytica and others, right? The developer community knows who those people are, so let's isolate them if we can, right? Let's take a look at what everybody's doing. Someone's doing something smart. Let's just steal the good ideas. And let's raise the bar just a little bit, right? So that if nothing else, we're doing something and it's better, right? We'll start there. So we created a little project here. We set up a list of principles. I've talked to my developer members. We built it based on sort of what people actually do and what we think makes sense. It is not 100% what GDPR would like you to do. This is more industry focused. This is what we think we could drive. The 2 sides here kind of differentiate the 2. So what you see on the far side is what European privacy regulation would require. And what you'll see is the government has a big role in a lot of things. And what it does is, their philosophy is minimize the amount of data, take away, eliminate the need for choice on the user's part, and just prevent them from placing themselves in harmful situations. On your left-hand side is sort of the approach we have taken. So, and it's, the keys are transparency and security, and then good, just stewardship. So, if the contract that you have with your users is, they're happy to share data with you, in exchange for services, as long as they sort of know what you're up to, right? So, tell them what data you're collecting, what you're doing with it. I'm using it to cure cancer. Okay, here you go, take it, right? I'm using it to, sell it to some third person to market to you. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, give them the right to sort of say yes or no, right? People will share if they kind of understand what's going on. We're a little more draconian on sort of who owns data. So, it's our philosophy that, there's a bunch of data that a user owns. If you post a photograph online, that's clearly yours. If somebody is monitoring your usage habits in a particular app, well, we would say that's shared information, right? Part of it is what you're doing, but part of it is I'm watching and I'm collecting it all, and so between the 2 of us, we have rights to that. And so, we treat it a little more as a shared model, and I think that's a little more rational and a little easier it's closer to how people really behave. And at the end of the day, we let the market decide on, do they want to use your app or service, or don't they? Do they trust you or don't they trust you? And that little mark in the middle is what we're going to use to try to indicate to the user community that this app or this service uses, at least hits these standards, right? And so you don't have to spend a ton of time on privacy policies and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you understand what that mark stands for, then you'll know that the bar is here. And we think that people will prefer to go to someone who's a little better actor than somebody who's sort of treating us like the Wild West. So we will see how it goes. I would invite you all to get engaged if you think this would be something useful. Some of our members think this is a pretty good marketing tool for them to their communities. So we covered a lot of stuff. What's the point of all that conversation? I mean, a bunch of it is to say, policy is a big deal. Policy is something that you need to worry about, but not too much. If you engage with folks like me, there's other trade associations and people who are involved who are looking out for you, but you need to be engaged and sort of help us do what we do. Part of this is I talked about ecosystems, I talked about communities and how all that has to come together to make things successful. So 3 points, I'll say, that I want to drive home. Number one, and the reason we're here, is you want to build an ecosystem, you want to participate in an ecosystem, you want to build applications, you want to have a successful product. It all begins with, who else is in that ecosystem with you, right? And are they the right players? Are they in the right position? Are they viewing it the right way? Are their motives good? Are they engaged in a way that you are able to trust them, that they know what they're doing and that they're going to drive things in the direction that you want, right? So, it is way important to spend time talking to communities like this to make sure that, you're engaged with people that are smart and that know what they're doing, right? And cast the net wide, because you're going to discover that there's, it's not always the names that it's not always the people who look like they sit at the center of the web that are going to be the winners. It's not easy to take one ecosystem and port it into another, so take a look. Message number 2, it's all about communities, right? At the end of the day, the only way that all this stuff works, we can build this awesome mousetrap. If there's no mice, you're not going to make any money. So you need to find communities, you need to nurture communities, you need to develop communities. The work that is being done with, the hackathon today, the work that Scott is doing to sort of build the developer community here, that is absolutely critical to be able to be successful, right? My additional message is, look around you and figure out what communities are you in that sort of are engaged in this, and make sure that you yourself are taking advantage of whatever it takes to bring those communities together, right? Because healthy and thriving communities, participation is what makes these things successful. And then my sort of big message is we need to step up. We need to take responsibility for what we do, right? The folks in this room, we are going to set some standards for new products and new capabilities that the folks in middle America don't see coming, right? We have this vision of a future that's very, very different than they've even thought about. They're just worrying about the day-to-day, right? Trying to pay bills. We need to make sure that we have taken them into account as we step forward, right? It isn't enough that you build something new and trust me, it'll be good for you, right? We've tried that, and the world is pushing back and saying that's not enough. So, my message is get engaged, find ways to participate in, the political discussion and the social discussion. Don't spend time trying to tell people that they're wrong. They know what they're talking about. And, if you can find people like the Developers Alliance, people like, the other trade associations around here, talk to Scott and others. If you're interested in getting involved, and if you have an issue that you'd like to support, we would love your help to be able to drive some positive change of our own. And so with that, I'm happy to take a question or two. Did you like the fractals? Was that too much? Was it? I don't know. Thanks. I'll take a question if anyone has one. I mean, we covered a ton of stuff, so. Anyone interested in politics? I can make predictions on what's going to happen in November.
Test. Okay, we've got a question in the back.
It was the November thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect this conference with this talk.
Yeah.
So what is the view of policymakers right now on standards? And there used to be very structured system of standards with IEEE, and now there are these different alliances, different flavors. Is it something seen as positive, or again, it creates entities that policymakers are critical about?
Let me try and unpack that. So they are, I mean, there are still, you know, IEEE or NIST. I mean, there's lots of people who are driving technical standards, right? So whether it's, you know, security, cybersecurity, they're trying to, NIST is busy working a privacy framework. IEEE, I'll use some of your examples. You know, they themselves are moving into some interesting domains. So just put out some standards on, you know, the application of ethics in artificial intelligence, right? So trying to drive some standards on how do you code ethically and responsibly when you're building AI. IoT, you know, the cyber certification that's taking place in Europe, or that they intend to put in place, is the government stepping in and saying, we don't trust industry-driven self-regulation to do things that have huge social implications if they get it wrong. So if IoT, you know, if it can be co-opted by, you know, a bad actor, and every connected device on the planet suddenly turns on us, you know, that's a nightmare scenario. And so the politicians say, well, that's way too important for IEEE to take care of. We'll do that. Thank you very much, right? So, roundabout answer, I think the standards organizations, people that are setting technical standards, they're still there. They are evolving with the complexity of the solutions that we're building. AI is far more complex than, you know, a Wi-Fi solution was back in the beginning. And then, you know, they're also looking at sort of the social implications and the societal implications of what we do. Our technology is embedded throughout society now. And so, you know, anything that we do wrong has impacts way beyond just what we've dealt with. And so that just pulls politicians deeper and deeper. So, was that helpful? And with that,
I believe that's all the questions.
no one wants?
Thank you, Bruce.
All right, thank you very much.